1,000 resumes. In this webinar, we're going to talk about the importance of your resume during your job search. People often underestimate the importance of the resume, and doing so can prevent you from landing interviews. Before we begin today, throughout the webinar, we'll present a series of poll questions. When we introduce a poll, it will pop up on the screen in a blue box. And I encourage you to participate in the polls because it's a great way for us to solicit feedback and also for you to measure yourself against other professionals. Also, feel free to submit questions in the question box during the presentation, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end where we will answer the questions that you've submitted. Now, I'm going to start the presentation, and then about halfway through, I'm going to turn it over to Vicki Hitty. Now, you have to keep in mind that there is a certain ebb and flow to the hiring process. One stage of the process leads to another stage, which leads to another stage. And specifically, this is how it typically works. Your resume helps you to land a telephone interview. The telephone interview helps you to get a face-to-face interview. And the face-to-face interview brings you closer to an offer of employment. As you can see, the process starts with the resume. In fact, your resume can be considered the launching pad for your job search. And the purpose of your resume is to land an interview and to land as many interviews as you can. In this webinar, we're going to talk in depth about the best ways to construct your resume. But before we do that, I want to address what your resume is not. Your LinkedIn profile is not your resume. I know that some people believe that their resume and their LinkedIn profile are the same thing. And that's because as a recruiter, I have asked professionals to send their resume to me, and they've responded with, well, see my LinkedIn profile. When a recruiter or a hiring manager asks you to send your resume, you should send your actual resume to them as an attachment in an email. I also recommend updating your LinkedIn profile at the same time that you update your resume and to keep them both consistent. But LinkedIn has definitely not replaced the resume in terms of its importance. People who try to use their LinkedIn profile in place of their resume are creating roadblocks for themselves in the process. And I have two stories that illustrate the importance of keeping both your resume and your LinkedIn profile updated. I was working on a search for one of our clients, and I had a suitable candidate for the position. This was an individual who had worked at the same company for 20 years. However, he had not updated his resume during the whole time over the last 20 years that he was working for his employer. And as you can imagine, he had a difficult time remembering everything that he had accomplished over the past 20 years, and it took him about 2 weeks to update his resume. And even then, it probably was not as good as it could have been if he had kept it updating along the way. Unfortunately, he did not get the position, and the fact that it took him so long to get his resume ready, and when he got it done, it just wasn't as good, like I said, as it could have been if he had updated it. I recommend updating your resume every 6 months. 1 year at the minimum, but you'll want to update it along the way. Every time you have an increase in responsibilities or you do something new that you're proud of, your accomplishments, you want to keep it updated. So twice a year is a good rule of thumb. And then secondly, I also recently submitted a candidate to one of our clients, and one of the first things that our client did was to check the candidate's LinkedIn profile. The problem was that their profile did not include the candidate's current employer. In other words, the profile was out of date. The LinkedIn profile listed a different employer than the employer that was listed on his resume. And even though this was a solid candidate with good credentials, the hiring manager rejected an interview with him because he said the candidate was not current with technology. And also it was confusing because he listed two different employers, one on the LinkedIn profile and one on the resume. When you submit your resume, assume that the hiring manager or the recruiter is going to look at your LinkedIn profile after they receive it. And more than likely, they are looking at your profile on other social media outlets too, like Facebook or Twitter. So be mindful of how you present yourself on social media across all the platforms. And I recommend setting your Facebook to private so that the whole world cannot see what you're posting. You just want your connections to see what you're posting. Because we've had numerous situations where candidates have applied for positions with different animal health organizations or veterinary companies, and the hiring manager has gone on Facebook and found pictures of things that they did not like, or pictures that they just felt were inappropriate, or posts that they thought were inappropriate. So we now have a poll question here. So let me get the poll question pulled up. Okay, is your resume and your LinkedIn profile completely up to date as of today? There are 3 answers supplied: yes, no, or I don't have a LinkedIn profile. Select the answer that best describes your current situation, and then we'll look at the results. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in just a few seconds. Okay, wow. Okay, 56% of you say that your LinkedIn profile, that your resume is in your LinkedIn profile. 19% or that's up to date. 19% say no, and 31% of you say that you don't have a LinkedIn profile. So that's almost a third of you do not have a LinkedIn profile. Okay, so now that we've discussed what your resume is and what it isn't, and I just want to make sure, okay, you can see my screen. Okay, so the next thing is that let's address how you should construct your resume. And specifically, I'm going to present some do's and don'ts for constructing your resume. I've had 20 years of experience in the recruiting and search industry, so when I make these recommendations, I'm doing so with one thing in mind, and that's to help you land more interviews. That's the number one goal of your resume, is to get your foot in the door with an employer. Okay. So the first thing is you'll want to make sure that you title your document appropriately. Every document that you create has a title. You have to name it something. People send out resumes all the time without paying any attention to the title of their resume document. And here are some examples. The wrong way would be to label it My Resume or Document 12 or Marketing Manager Position. Titles like these can hurt your efforts in landing an interview. What you want to do instead is to give your resume an accurate, descriptive, eye-catching title. And it's more difficult to dismiss your document when you do this. And you want to have your name as part of the document title. Here are some examples of using this approach. Harry Tasker for Technical Services Veterinarian, Canine Veterinarian Jack Ryan, or Ethan Hunt, Director of Clinical Research and Regulatory Affairs. This is often an overlooked part of your resume, so make sure that you take care of this first, and that way you won't forget it later. Second, make sure that you remember that your resume is part of your personal brand. As such, you need to put your name on the top of the resume. And I know that that sounds simple and like common sense, but some people actually write the word resume at the top of their resume. You'll need to put your name at the top, and regardless of which font you use regular caps and not all caps. You can also use a bold face to make your name stand out. And after all, the whole purpose of this exercise is for you to stand out. Third, you'll want to make sure that your resume contains your contact information and your address, but you don't need to bold that information. You don't necessarily need your street address, but you should definitely provide a city and state. Your address and city or state are needed in case relocation is an issue, but especially the city and state, because we are getting so many resumes in our search firm right now that don't have addresses. They don't even have a city and state. And so we don't know where that person is located. If the job requires the person to be in Kansas City, we get a resume with no city or state. We have no idea if that person's in Kansas City or if they're in New York or Florida or California. And so because of the hundreds and thousands of resumes that we get and other recruiters and hiring managers are getting, sometimes they may not call a candidate if they're unsure of where they live. And so you might think, well, I can relocate or I can go anywhere, so it's not relevant. But it is relevant because sometimes companies are not looking for people to relocate. They're looking for people that are locally, but they're just sometimes unlikely to call you if you don't have a location on your resume. Also include your cell phone number with your contact information, and don't bother to include your home telephone number even if you have one, because you're probably not going to be home during the day, and hiring managers would rather have a cell phone number. They know that you're more likely to answer your cell phone when they call, and some hiring managers are texting candidates these days too. You should include your email address, since email correspondence is common during the hiring process. However, you want to include a professional sounding email address. And these days, people typically have access to more than one email account, so choose the address that is the most professional and make sure that you check it at least once every day, because you'd be surprised at how job seekers will list an email address and they won't check it every day, and sometimes they miss out on messages from hiring managers or recruiters because they've gone several days without checking their email. But using an email address like vetdude360@hotmail.com is not a good option. If you don't have an email account with a professional sounding address, then you need to create one. And if you're still using an AOL or a Hotmail account, I highly recommend that you get a Gmail account. They're free, they're easy to set up, and they will make you look more professional and modern. When I get a resume with an AOL email address, it makes me think that the candidate is not current. Okay, fourth, do not include a mission statement or an objective statement on your resume. Instead, I recommend to use an executive summary or a professional summary. If you state your mission or an objective statement, then it may not line up perfectly with the organization's mission and their current opening. But if you list an executive summary, then it might more closely align with the company's expectations. And we've had instances of candidates. For example, we had one candidate who was applying for a technical services veterinarian position, and their objective statement said that they were looking for a marketing position. So if you're and here's the sad truth. I mean, this is, companies don't really care what your objective is. They only care about their objective, which is finding the best person for the position they have open. So if you're putting an objective on there and it does not line up with their current openings, they may not think you're interested, even though they may have other openings that you may qualify for. And fifth, when you list your work history, it's important to list it in reverse chronological order and make the work history as relevant as you can to your job search. And I also recommend tailoring the resume to the specific job for which you are applying. Lately, I have been seeing more resumes listing the work history in chronological order instead of reverse chronological order, where candidates are putting their job right out of college at the top of the resume, and it makes it look as though the job they had right out of college is the current job that they have now. And it can be confusing and misleading, especially if the person looking at the resume is only looking at it for just a few seconds. Because think about that, and I know Vicki will talk about that later, about how long a recruiter or hiring manager is actually looking at your resume, but they're expecting that the job that's listed at the top of your resume is your current position. Now, one question that I've received quite a bit over the years is one about gaps in work experience. And at one time or another, many people have had a gap in their work history. If that's the case, include something that you did during that gap that would add value to your resume. And it could be something related to volunteering or charity work of some kind. But don't make it appear as though you just simply disappeared during that time period. And six, don't write references available upon request on your resume. These days, it's understood that you're going to have references ready should a recruiter or hiring manager need them. But that's an outdated statement that was common 20 years ago, but not today. And seventh, I'm almost surprised I have to mention this, but I do because it still happens, but don't include personal information on your resume because it is completely irrelevant. That would include your ethnicity, your religion, your children. We've had candidates that will list the number of children that they have. They'll list the names, the ages, or the date of birth. We've had candidates that have listed their marital status. Don't do that because that doesn't demonstrate anything to the hiring manager about why you should hire. and be higher. There's also no reason to include your salary information because that could hurt you during the salary negotiation stage of the process. And finally, and I'm surprised to have to mention this too, but I do because we do get resumes where people list their social security number on them, and that is a security hazard if your resume ends up in the wrong hands. And again, it's just irrelevant. It's also not a good idea to put personal information like this on your LinkedIn profile. And in talking about LinkedIn profiles, it's important that you have a professional-looking photo on your profile. Don't put up your wedding picture or a picture of your family on their vacation. And I think it's worth it, too, to hire somebody, hire a professional photographer who's going to take a picture of you in professional attire. I think it's a worthwhile investment. At this point in the webinar, I'd like to talk about what is known as applicant tracking systems. Employers use applicant tracking systems to help sort through the many resumes that they receive for their job openings. And employers believe that the applicant tracking system, or the ATS, will weed people out and act as artificial intelligence to separate the qualified candidates from the unqualified ones. However, that's a big problem with the candidates because sometimes the ATS weeds out good candidates due to the fact that the candidates have poorly written resumes, even if they're a qualified candidate. So do not include a photo of yourself on your resume, and you'd be surprised at how many people will put a photo of themselves on the resume. And unless you're applying for a job as an international model, it's not recommended, but also including your photo can throw off the applicant tracking system where it will not import your resume properly because the applicant tracking system, they're just looking for words, for keywords, for text. So it would almost be like you never applied for the position at all. And if you're putting any kind of graphics on your resume, and we see this often with people that work in marketing, they'll make their resume look really fancy. I even saw a resume the other day where they put text up the left side and then across the top and then down the right side. But the problem with that is the applicant tracking system, they don't know how to import that. And like I said, if it even gets put in there, it'll get lost and it'll be like you never applied for the position at all. And next, I know that some recruiters may not agree with me, but I highly recommend not presenting a PDF of your resume. I recommend presenting a Word document instead. And the reason is that there are so many different types of PDFs that there can be formatting problems. And once again, the applicant tracking system may have problems importing it. And PDF formats make it hard to search for keywords on the resume, especially if the resume is protected. And our company, we use a cloud company to manage our applicant tracking system. And the company that we work with, they manage 200 recruiting firms' applicant tracking system. And I've talked to the owner about this numerous times. And he said that all 200 of his clients have a really hard time with getting PDF resumes to parse correctly so that when the resume goes into their applicant tracking system and they're trying to search for keywords, they have a hard time, and then sometimes they cannot find those resumes. So that's why I highly recommend a Word document instead. Now, what you do want to do is to make sure that your resume contains the appropriate keywords related to the position. Now, you don't want to stuff the resume with so many keywords that it's difficult to actually read, but you do want to include enough of the keywords that both the applicant tracking system will screen it and will also grab the attention of the hiring manager. And I have a case study of this. I had a candidate who was applying for a regulatory affairs position. This candidate had years of experience doing regulatory affairs, working with the Center for Veterinary Medicine at the FDA. But on her resume, she had listed FDA and not CVM. So both the applicant tracking system could not find the word CVM on the resume because it wasn't on there, and then the human resources manager who was reviewing the resume thought she was not qualified because she did not have the acronym CVM on her resume. She had FDA instead. So you want to be really careful and pay attention to the keywords that are in the job description, especially down in the qualifications section, and make sure that your resume is matching those exact keywords so that you will be found in these applicant tracking systems. So now that we know how to navigate the applicant tracking systems, we'll turn our attention to the hiring manager. And keep in mind that you are not conducting a job search in a vacuum. You're competing against other candidates. So even if you make it past the ATS and the first round of cuts, you're still competing against other good qualified candidates. And that means that you must create a resume that will have the most impact and do a great job of showing why you are worthy of a face-to-face interview. And you must tailor your resume to the job for which you are applying. And some candidates will send the same resume for every job, and that is not the best approach. There are small tweaks that you can make to your resume to tailor it appropriately. And this includes emphasizing work experience and skills that align more with the position. And you have to tie what you possess in terms of experience, talent, and abilities to what the organization wants. In addition to tailoring your resume, you should also tailor your cover letter, starting with the salutation. And I can't tell you how many cover letters that I get that start out with Dear Jim or Dear Debbie, and my name is Stacy. Also, make sure that you spell the person's name correctly. I spell my first name without an E, but I still receive many cover letters with my name spelled incorrectly. I've also been called Tracy and other names. In addition, they're not Stacy. So that's not a good way to get your foot in the door. So be very, very focused on detail. And I know Vicki will talk about that here more in a minute. I recently had a candidate send a cover letter to me that was addressed to a certain animal health pharmaceutical company, and I'm not with a pharmaceutical company. So if candidates are making this mistake with the recruiter, they're also making it with hiring managers. And if you don't know the name of the hiring manager, just don't put the name on the resume. A general salutation is better than one that's not correct. And remember that hiring managers want to know what you can accomplish for them in the future. If your past accomplishments don't convince them that you have the capacity to help their company grow, then you likely won't be selected for an interview. In fact, your past accomplishments have to convince a hiring manager that you can do one of three things. And these three things are what motivate a company to hire somebody and not somebody else. While everybody brings different strengths to the table and suffers from different weaknesses, the motivation for hiring officials remains constant. There are three main reasons why a hiring official would want to make you an offer. Number one, they believe that you're going to make the company money. Secondly, they believe that you're going to save the company money. Or third, they believe that you're going to add value to the company in some way. How do you convince hiring managers that you can do these things? You first do it with your resume and then during the face-to-face interview. In both cases, your goal is to use your past accomplishments to illustrate how you made your current and past employers money, how you saved your current and past employers money, and the value that you added to your current and past employers. So now we have another poll question here. So when you're applying for positions, do you tailor your resume to the position? And there are two answers, yes or no. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Okay, and good. It looks like 74% of you said yes, that you do tailor your resume to the specific position. I'm really pleased to see that. And as if 26% of you say no. So think about doing that the next time you're applying for a position, is tailoring it to the specific position. Okay, I just hope you can see my screen. Okay, so now there are four key areas to consider when you're doing your resume. The first is your professional accomplishments. When you're doing this, speak in quantitative terms if possible. For instance, if you're in sales, refer to your sales volume. If you saved money for your current employer or helped it to generate more revenue, discuss the specifics of those situations. It's even a good idea to speak in terms of numbers for smaller achievements. For example, if you were a manager, disclose how many people you managed. Whatever you've done of any significance during your career probably has numbers tied to it, and that's what a hiring manager wants to read about. And that's because the bottom line when it comes to hiring is results. Organizations want to hire people who will get results. And the best way to show your history of results to a hiring manager is to quantify those results and tie numbers to as many of your accomplishments as you can. And the second thing is professional training designations. Are you licensed in a particular area? Have you earned various certifications? If so, list those because they're definitely applicable. And third, your educational accomplishments. Yes, you'll want to list your college degrees, but also include any relevant awards, honors, or scholarships that you might have received. And four, your additional skills. And these can include a wide range of competencies. Perhaps you can speak a second language, maybe you know sign language, but list anything that you believe might be valuable for a hiring manager to know. However, don't be tempted to add secondary skills that hold no value in relation to the position for which you are applying. You may be proud of the skill, but if it's not relevant and it won't help you get a face-to-face interview, then it's best to leave it off your resume. If you do have the skills, the talent, and experience necessary, then making your resume stand out is not difficult. You just have to emphasize the right things and illustrate why you're the person the employer should hire. At the very least, you need to convince company officials that you are the person that they need to bring in for an interview. The maximum length of your resume should be 2 pages. Most recruiters or hiring managers only spend about 30 seconds or less looking at a resume. If they have to look through 3 or 4 pages, they're going to lose interest very quickly. And I will admit, I have been a recruiter for 20 years, and I have never read every single word on a resume, and I have seen thousands and thousands of them. Most of the time, I look at a resume for about 30 seconds. I look at the companies a person has worked for. I look at their titles, their career progression. I ask myself, is this person moving forward in their career? Are they going backwards in their career? Are they stagnant? I also look at their accomplishments and how well they've done their job. So you have a limited amount of time to convey that information, and hiring managers often spend less than 30 to 60 seconds looking at a resume. The place where many people try to add too much information is with their job descriptions. And when it comes to that section, try to paraphrase and use bullet points whenever you can, because hiring managers are going to be scanning these resumes, and scanning is easier when there are bullet points that draw the eye. If your resume is too difficult to scan, then chances are good that they're not going to take the time to actually read it. And there's one more thing that I'd like to address when it comes to your resume, and that is telling the truth 100% of the time. I know that some people are tempted to exaggerate about their work history or their experience, but that's a bad idea. And according to a Career Builder survey of more than 2,500 hiring managers in the summer of 2015, 56% caught candidates lying on their resume, and the most common lie was about skills or capabilities. And not only that, but 25% of the hiring managers in the survey also said that they've seen people claim to be employed by companies that they never actually worked for. Unfortunately, I have seen many stories involving candidates who did not tell the truth on their resume. And one of the things that they lie about is whether they're actually employed. And something like this happened earlier this year when I was talking with a candidate, and he said that he was employed by a certain company. And then my next call came from his former employer that said they had gone through some layoffs recently, and the employer gave me a list of all of the people that had been laid off and were no longer with the company, and that candidate's name was on the list. So that candidate conveyed to me that he was still employed at that company when in fact he was not. So it's far better to be upfront and honest at the beginning of the process and tell the truth. And you've probably heard or read at one time or another during the past few years that their traditional resume is in danger of being obsolete. But there are usually a host of reasons provided for which this is the case. And some people believe that it's social media. Others believe that the digital age is turning the resume into a dinosaur of the past, and others think that the internet is going to kill the resume. And there's no doubt that all of these things have had an effect on the world of employment and hiring, but after 20 years in the business, I can tell you one thing for sure, that they have not killed the traditional resume. It is still important, and it's still being used by hiring managers to determine who is a good candidate and who is not. So you should not overlook the importance of your resume, and you should not dismiss it. And once again, your LinkedIn profile is not your resume. Simply referring a recruiter or a hiring manager to your LinkedIn profile is not helpful to getting you hired. And not only do you need a resume, but you need a good resume. And creating a good resume is not a waste of time. It's an investment in your career. We have our last poll question. Okay. Okay, the question is, what grade would you give your current resume? And the available answers are simple, ranging from A all the way down to F. So select the answer, and then we'll look at the results. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Okay, it looks like 15% of you would give a letter A to your resume. 60% would give a B. That's pretty good. 15% gave a C, 0% D, and 10% of you gave an F. Okay, it's at this point in the presentation that I would like to introduce our special guest, Vicki Hitty, the owner of Resume Source. Vicki has been writing resumes since 1986 when she was employed by Professional Resume and Writing Service. She has successfully built a resume practice from a one-person operation to one with multiple locations. Vicki is also the author of Capturing Success, a book about thinking through the job search process. I'd like to thank Vicki for joining us today and also to turn over the presentation to her at this time.
Stacy, thank you. That was good information about resumes that you've been giving folks. Your resume is it's the ticket to the interview, and it's what opens the door. Resumes can be riveting in their design, and riveting doesn't necessarily mean flashy. It means it's drawing the eye to what you want them to see. It's very important that you pinpoint a resume format that works for you, that's effective for you and your industry. Many industries require one format over another, and so it's important to find what the recruiter wants to see and what's standard in the industry. Revamping the structure of your resume, you're telling a story, and you want people to see that you're very competent in your skill set. And knowing when it's time to challenge conventional wisdom on a resume. And sometimes everybody will tell you, always do it this way or never do it that way. But what you're looking at is how do you deliver a resume that's going to work for you. And how you know that is you have to test it. You have to deliver, and if it's working for you at your salary level or above, then you know that your salary is opening the doors for the next step in your career. Then after you've tested it and let people look at it, then you want to deploy it, and it should open doors for you. And you want to land the right job at the right time. One of the things that I found to be very helpful in building a resume, and I've recommended this for years, is that you have either some point of information collection, and that could be I've had people use file folders, I've had people use notebooks with page protectors, I've had them do digital portfolios where they keep copies of their degrees and their awards and all their congratulatory emails and their certificates. And even in this file, you need your old, outdated resume because it shows where you've been and where you are currently. And you want a list of contacts. Over the years, it's been amazing to me that people would come into my office and tell me, I had a recruiter contact me when, but I don't have an industry-specific recruiter. But I do not know how to get in touch with that recruiter because I didn't keep the contact information. It is very important that you maintain good, accurate records as you're going through your job search process. That includes your education, your work history dates, professional organizations, civic and community activities, a list of the 5 reasons to hire you. And at this point, we also want to talk about your strengths, or the 5 reasons to hire. Let me go back to the 5 reasons to hire you. Why would you, what are the 5 reasons that someone should hire you for the position that you're applying for? You need to think that through and come up with what aligns with the job description. And also, what are your 5 strengths? You want to identify your audience. It's very important that you're writing to your audience. I always ask, is your resume working for you at the targeted salary level? It's very important that you are either at your salary level or above. There are very many people out there that are underemployed that need to be applying for better jobs because they're really working under their potential. Every resume is a work in progress, and they all can be made better. Even the ones I hand to my clients, there's always something. I mean, I'm good at what I do, but what I found is people forget to tell me something, or they had an accomplishment in the last 24 hours that didn't make it to the resume. And as you're looking at your old resume, what do you like about the format? Does it speak? Does it actually sell you to the employer? And how has it worked for you? Has it been effective? If it's opened the doors that you wanted to open, it's effective for you. And what can be improved on it? You want to compile a list of your projects and how you've shown leadership and distinguished yourself as a leader on a team. You want to have some areas where you took the initiative, where you anticipated needs, and then you took the initiative on a project. You also want to give examples of how you've delivered results, and then you want to make sure that you know in the back of your mind what factors distinguish you from the other candidates in the candidate pool. What information is required to tell your story? As I'm looking at a resume, I want people to see that my clients are competent. A resume is not a list of what you have done or the accomplishments in your career. It's more, rather it is a document that connects the dots for the reader and shows them what the next step in your career should be. And remember, a credible presentation has a lot of value. And, you know, it's very important that they draw the reader in and that you add a little sizzle to your resume. Researching the layout. Contact information is very important. And the objective versus using an objective, because it is out of date, a profile or a brief that kind of holds your skills and brings them to the forefront. Education and training, if there's education and training or certifications that you've received that put you in a different category of candidates, you want to obtain all the education that you can get and make sure that's showcased. Then also the career experience, the name of the employer, the city, the state, dates of employment, 3 to 5 bullets, your accomplishments, and making sure that you tell them the size of the territory and dollar volume and customers if you've trained people, if you develop new accounts, and then you want to talk about any of your technical skills. Margins are very important. I remember a gentleman bringing me a resume with a 0.3 or 4 margin, 0.3 or 4 inch margin all the way around it. This was not a document that you wanted to read. And I can usually tell by looking at the margins on the resume if I want to pick it up and read it. 1 inch margins are probably ideal. Sometimes you have to expand them a little bit. Font size, you want to make sure that you're using something that people can read. And I don't like to go, but it depends on the font you select. I like an 11 or a 12 point size font, because even the youngest resume screener gets tired eyes after they've read 200 or 300 resumes. You want consistency of font, and the position on the paper of your resume, the most important information needs to be in the top 50% on the top half of the fold, and it needs to be compelling, and you need to distill what you can do and what you can deliver, the results that you can deliver for the employer in that top 50% of your resume. While I will write a 2-page resume, and occasionally I break the rules and I will write a 3-page resume, the only thing that people have to read to determine that you're qualified is that first page of the resume. Everything else is just additional information. So when you're writing it, make sure everything that the recruiter needs to know about you is on that front page of the resume. I want the reader to see that you're valuable and you're a competent candidate. And I want to accent your potential and while showing your career history. And about the color of paper, you know, I used to buy $1,000, $1,200 worth of paper a year. I don't think I spend $50 on paper now, because everything is electronic, and your resume has to be written for that electronic media. Stacy mentioned write it in reverse chronological order, and I was making notes about don't use acronyms. There are exceptions to that. If everybody in the industry knows what that acronym is, you want to use it. And if you have to condense your resume, you can always go with a 10-year work history. That's what most people require. On weighing your words, you want to use action verbs. And I was trained, don't use responsible for, pronouns, abbreviations, or outdated business jargon. While this will sound contradictory, it's my practice to undersell a candidate's qualifications just a little bit, because I want you to be more valuable when you walk through the door for that employer. And you want to, back to the list on the screen, you want to use present tense for your current job and past tense for the previous job. And collecting information about your accomplishments is essential. And I think a lot of times as individuals, we undervalue our accomplishments. We think, oh, everybody else performs at that level, and that's really not the truth. You want to organize those, you want to list them, and any place that you've exceeded performance, you want to be able to make a list of those areas. You want to create a framework to communicate your accomplishments. You want to, if you've streamlined processes, improve quality, develop new accounts, all of that information needs to be there. If you've improved quality, if you've implemented new processes, anything that you can sit down and frame in a way that is going to speak to the position that you're applying for. And as you're writing your accomplishment, there's a very much a tightrope of when you're writing your accomplishments, not to brag. And there's a way to frame it so it's information and you're not bragging about what you've done. Anytime that you can include numbers on a resume, it will draw the eye. and as I'm looking up on the screen, that 10% and that 15% draws my eye, not the words that are there. If you were Rookie of the Year, you want to make sure you've included that. If you double sales, and if you've increased sales in your territory by a certain percentage or added X number of new customers or distributors, make sure the numbers are there. In the education, you want to make sure the institution, the city, the state, and your degrees are listed on your resume. I usually use GPA if a candidate has less than 6 years of experience. If you have more than that, I'll let the experience speak for itself. You want to make sure you listed your continuing ed. This is kind of something that I use when I am Vicki's rules on writing a resume. If you have 1 to 6 years of experience, I will use more details around your education. If you have 6 to 12 years of experience, I'm going to kind of pare that down just a little bit. If you have more than 12 years, I'm probably just going to list the degree and take a very broad brush with your education. But you want to list what's relevant to the position, and if there's some additional training that you've had, you want to make sure you list that too. The other relevant information is really customized to the individual. If you've done something that adds strength to the resume, you want to make sure that is there. Military experience, licensing, certificates, awards, recognition, foreign language, volunteer experience, community involvement, all this is very important. And companies are hiring the total you, and they usually want people that are giving back to their community as well and contributes across. They're looking for people that contribute across multiple areas. And one of the things that I like to pay very close attention to is who is reading the resume. We talked about the online tracking system. If that's very important, you need to write your resume so that it jumps through all those hoops. If it's being read on a cell phone, so is it being read on a computer? These are all things that you need to take into consideration when you're putting together your resume. If you're handing someone a resume, they're going to look at it totally different. Are you emailing it to a recruiter? What are the industry requirements and what are the corporate requirements? Know your audience. Understand the technology and recognize the pros and cons of industry trends. Now you've got your resume written. You're looking at it. Is it one that you want to read? Has all the relevant questions been answered that a recruiter wants to know about you? But there's times that you really, I've had clients that have overthought the process. They will spend weeks working on their resume and changing every little word when they should be testing the resume. I mean, while it needs to be perfect, and they're as perfect as it can be, it will never be perfect. But you need to get it out in front of people. And if it's not working for you, that's when you need to rethink what you've done about your resume. Resume by committee. Many years ago, I did this resume for this lady, and she took it and showed it to her friend. She was in one industry. She showed it to her friend in another industry, and she came back and she says, my friend he was the airline industry, did not like the resume. And I said, are you planning to apply to that particular airline? She says, oh, no. And I said, well, had you been applying to that industry, you would have had a totally different look. So it's very important to know what is required. And I have to listen very carefully when it comes to the resume by committee, because there are some resumes that I've seen over the years that it looks like 3 or 4 people have written the resume, and there's not a consistency of style. And you want to make sure that the writing style and the formatting is very consistent from one job to another. and make sure it's as effective as it can be. Your summary, my philosophy is that the summary of your experience is probably the most important section of the resume. You need 3 to 5 bullets that summarize your skills, and you can use a few numbers here. You want to identify the strengths for the reader so that they know who you are. And objectivity is very key. What does the reader want to know about you? Are you qualified? Can you deliver results? And rarely do we see ourselves as others see us. So sometimes it's very important to hand your resume off to somebody that you trust that can look at it and say, yes, this is who you are. But normally what you hear is, why didn't you include this and why didn't you include that? You know, with all the resumes I've written over the years, when I write mine and hand it to somebody that knows me, they tear it up because I don't see myself in the same way that they see me. So it's important, especially if it's a positive thing, that you want to incorporate something different. Good resumes are the roadmap for the interview, and questions will naturally rise when that summary is written correctly, and you will be able to anticipate questions during the interview process. What 5 words summarize your expertise? And you need to have in the back of your mind what those 5 words that tell the reader about who you are and what you can deliver. I think you need a good checklist on when you look at your resume and you look at your job search process. Are there action results-oriented phrases, quantifiable outcomes? Is it in reverse chronological order? And you go through this list and you've proofread the document. You know, there's nothing any more embarrassing than have a typo on one. You want to make sure you've got your cover letters, your reference list, your voicemail. Stacy mentioned a professional email. You want to even have sample letters for thank you for the interview, so you can send those immediately when you walk out. You want to, but as you've looked at all that, you want to also think through the telephone interview process. I've always suggested that my clients, well, this was when there were landlines. I keep a copy of your resume near the phone. With your cell phone, you may need to keep it where you can get to it on your cell phone and refer to it if somebody is asking you questions. You've got to be prepared for a panel interview. Many of the different kinds of interviews out there. And if your resume is well written, it will be the roadmap for those interviews. Stacy, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Vicki. All right, well, that was great. I think, Vicki, there was one more slide.
There's one more slide. I'm so sorry. Don't tell anyone that I told you this. Exceptional resume writing is much like a fancy layered cake. Your experience, your education, and it all fits together. Maybe like a puzzle might be another way to put this. What you have done, your educational foundation, what you can do, what the industry expects, and even down to the economic climate and the influencers around it, the economy. And you need to know what the power words are in business jargon in your industry. And in some cases, is your personality reflected on your resume? And make sure the recruiter understands your work ethic. And I know this is a cliche, but you only get one chance to make a good first impression.
Well, thank you, Vicki, for all of that great information. And remember to visit resumesource.com, and I'll put Vicki's contact information up here if you want to jot that down. Now, if you have any questions for me, you can send me an email, and I'll put my address on the next screen. If you have any questions about resumes, you can contact Vicki. Now, if you're interested in Vicki's resume writing and editing services, and if you mention the Vet Recruiter in either a call or an email, Vicki's going to give you 10% off of her resume services. Now, we also have some time for Q&A. If anybody has any questions for either Vicki or myself, you can type those down at the bottom in the question box. So we'll wait just a few minutes and give you a chance to ask any questions that you may have. I did want to say something too about Vicki. When Michael Eisner was running the Walt Disney Company, one of Vicki's resumes landed on his administrative assistant's desk, and she said it was one of the best resumes that she had ever seen in her career. I don't know anybody that has more experience writing resumes than Vicki, and Vicki certainly 24,000 resumes. That's a whole lot of resumes. So we'll leave it open for just another minute. If you have any questions, please type them in. I don't see any questions yet, but we'll wait just another minute. I also want to mention that if you're interested in any career tips, you can sign up for our website. We have a monthly newsletter. We also send out hot jobs around the middle of the month, and we send out a newsletter at the beginning of the month that also includes hot jobs, but also advice for your career. And you can sign up on our website. I've listed our website here. So I don't see any questions. So if you do have any after the webinar, like I said, feel free to email me or Vicki. And again, thank you to Vicki, and thank you for everyone who registered and attended our webinar today. We hope the information we presented today will be of great help to you during your job search. Hope everyone has a great day.